So good evening to everyone at the Austrian Permanent Representation to the EU. I'm really happy that so many people showed up today, and it just shows how relevant the topic is and how much we have to expect from this evening. A special welcome to Commissioner Kyriakides, Austrian Minister Johannes Rauch, the Maltese Deputy Prime Minister Fern, and Ima Cook, Director of the European Medicines Agency, coming from Amsterdam probably today. And then we have Clemens Martin-Auer, the President of the European Health Forum, Gastein, also welcome. And also welcome to our panelists that will speak with us today. Carla van Rooyen, who's the Director General of the Ministry of Health, Welfare and Sport of the Netherlands. Adrian van den Hove of Medicines for Europe, and Silvia Maurer from BUSC, and then also Katharina Reich, the Director General and Chief Medical Officer. That's a title that has been invented some years ago, which sounds really fancy and good title, in the Ministry of Health in Austria. I'm really happy that we can have this evening today, and I would just like to mention two aspects that are important for us. One is that we're really happy to be part of the so-called Benelux cooperation, which has as an aim to provide affordable, sustainable access to medicines. And also one important aspect that we will discuss about today, tonight, is that the Austrian government is very much committed also to keep production from medicines in Europe. And there we have one big plant in Kundl producing phenylephrine. And this is also something that we think is important also to keep in the EU. But that's all for now. Very much welcome to every one of you. Now I think I give the floor to our Minister, Mr. Johannes Rauch. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for hosting us this evening. Very warm welcome, Commissioner. Everybody, welcome for hosting us this evening in the Austrian Permanent Representation. It's the first time for me in this very nice building, and I have spent a little time in your office. You have a very beautiful office in the overview over Brussels. It's my pleasure to welcome all our speakers and to thank our participants, whether you are joining us here in Brussels or online. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the European Health Forum Gastein for hosting this event with us at this crucial moment in time. The revision of pharmaceutical legislation has been described as a once-in-a-generation opportunity. And as we face multiple challenges, we must seize this opportunity. Patients' needs must be at the heart of the revision, which will regulate the products and treatments they need to access. Its ultimate goal must be to provide better and affordable medicines for those who need them and to ensure the sustainability of our health systems. We have recently experienced shortages of established medical products, and this is worrying, not only because of the negative impacts on patients' health, but also because such shortages risk eroding citizens' trust in our healthcare systems. Austria strongly supports the efforts to ensure security of supply through this revision. If the last 3 years have taught us anything, it is that we cannot rely on single source supply chains and that we are vulnerable to external shocks. New legislative measures and innovative production strategies are needed, including incentives for innovation, especially in areas of unmet medical need. Regulators need to develop incentives for manufacturers to keep production in Europe, and more importantly, to bring it back to Europe. The industry in turn has a responsibility to ensure security of supply. When it comes to developing developing new medicines, we also need to focus on direct pull incentives, such as awards which would particularly benefit small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as universities and smaller research infrastructures. Another important aspect is that we need to make medicines environmentally friendly. Austria also strongly agrees on the need to better tackle the silent pandemic of antimicrobial resistance, which requires a multifaceted approach. On the one hand, it is essential to create incentives for the development and commercialization of novel antibiotics. And on the other hand, we need to reduce the use of antibiotics, including by strengthening diagnostics. There are significant challenges we face, but the pandemic has also demonstrated what we can achieve when the public and the private sector work closely together. We can be proud of our innovators and scientists who develop both vaccines and therapeutics to combat COVID-19. Let me also emphasize that this has been achieved with massive public funding and regulatory support from the authorities. Public authorities share a responsibility together with pharmaceutical producers and wholesalers to guarantee availability, accessibility, and affordability for the therapies that our patient needs. Profit margins cannot be the sole reason for supplying our population, as I believe, contrary to Margaret Thatcher, that there is indeed such a thing as society. And this thing needs to stand at the center of our policies and business always and everywhere. As I have pointed to before, disruptions in the supply pose a high risk of eroding citizens' trust. Trust we are working so hard to rebuild at national and EU level. We need to tackle the issue openly and with utmost transparency. In conclusion, dear Commissioner, I would like to thank you for your crucial work on this key legislation. Austria will continue to be an active partner on this important topic. Dear Commissioner, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Dear Deputy Prime Minister, dear Minister, Ambassador, dear Director Cook, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here. And I was thinking when I was preparing some of my notes to share with you this evening that the title given to this event, Addressing Challenges and Seizing Opportunities, really fully captures the reform of the EU pharmaceutical legislation. Addressing challenges and seizing opportunities. Challenges we all know exist and need to be addressed in order to be able to deliver what we are all trying to achieve together, and that is an opportunity for change. It is a reform which has been a very long time coming to address the chronic challenges in this area. In order to achieve this, we need to work together in a spirit of solidarity, as we have done during this unprecedented health crisis, so that the member states, the Commission, the European Parliament achieve what we set out to do. And that is to solve the problems that everybody has been highlighting for a very long time. First and foremost, we need to address the interests of patients across Europe. This is an opportunity to put patients at the center, but at the same time, fully supporting an innovative and globally competitive EU industry. These two objectives we believe should be pursued in balance, not as trade-offs. Delivering on this is one of the most important tasks in the area of health during our mandate. And I can assure you that I am fully aware of the expectations, but I'm also fully aware of the concerns. Our current rules have been put in place in a different era, and we need to move with the times. Our citizens, our societies, and our economies need a system that will keep in pace with scientific and technological progress and can ensure affordability, access, and availability of medicines at all times. And what I would like is that when looking at this proposal, it is important to look at it as a whole, as a toolbox. One part complements the other. No part of the proposal and no initiative should be seen in isolation. So let me recall the 6 key aims that we want to achieve with this reform. Firstly, we want to ensure that all Europeans can access both innovative and established medicines when they need them, wherever they may live. The reality today is that in a fragmented internal market, medicines are not reaching patients quickly enough, and they are not in all the member states at the same time. Secondly, and most importantly, we want to ensure that the EU pharmaceutical industry can innovate and can remain globally competitive. And this is why we make sure we give strong incentives for innovation, especially for unmet medical needs. We will also support patients so that they can all access the benefits of this innovation equally. And this is a long-standing request from Austria and other member states. And this is why we will reward those who go the extra mile to provide EU-wide access. And here lies the balancing act that we want to achieve. Innovation to serve every patient equally and equitably across the EU. Thirdly, this is reform to address shortages of medicines and the reform to increase our security of supply. There will be stronger obligations on supply and transparency of stocks. Shortages and withdrawals will have to be notified earlier. European Medicines Agency will have a stronger role in coordinating our actions against shortages. Fourthly, we will aim to make medicines more environmentally sustainable. For too long, we have known that pharmaceutical production impacts on our environment. And these impacts will now be part of our authorization processes, and environmental risk assessments are going to be an integral part of authorization dossiers. Fifthly, we need an ambitious tool and tools, I would say, to combat antimicrobial resistance. This is a silent killer that at the moment claims more than 35,000 lives per year. Our pharmaceutical reform is the perfect vehicle, and it will include measures both to stimulate new antimicrobial products as well as prudent use. We are considering to propose transferable exclusivity vouchers for the development of novel antimicrobials to be granted and used under strict conditions. But we will also be looking at procurement mechanisms for access to new and existing antimicrobials that would guarantee revenue regardless of sales volumes. Last, but certainly not least, as this is the most horizontal of the novel elements we will bring, simplification, regulatory modernization, and digitalization. A leaner regulatory environment for investment with simplified and faster marketing authorization procedures, stronger support for promising medicines, and better use of data and digitalization. So our ambition is very clear. Our ambition is to put forward the proposal in the next few weeks that we will both be patient-centered and industry-friendly. A balanced proposal which does not create winners and losers, but builds a virtuous circle between industry and patients, to deliver innovation where it is needed most to our citizens across the Union. And this requires close cooperation, and I count on your support during the negotiation so we can bring the EU pharmaceutical system into the 21st century. And this is exactly, coming back to how I started, what is meant by addressing the challenges and seizing the opportunities. And these are opportunities that must not be lost. Thank you. I don't think I know who to call next.
Thank you very much.
And I apologize, but I have to go because we have a long health council tomorrow, as the ministers know, and we're still working on it.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. We're delighted you were able
No,
to
thank
make
you
it
so
this
much
time.
for the opportunity. Thank you. Good to see you too. Thank you so much for the invitation.
So with thanks to the Commissioner and also Ambassador and Minister for getting us started, it's now my pleasure to invite our panelists to join me up here to answer some questions, but also to be open to answering some questions from you. And so we will be leaving time to make sure that you are able to ask some questions. But may I invite you? We will find microphones on the end table if you would like to take one. Thank you. Thank you very much for. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much for joining me here at the table. I would like to begin by coming back to the points made by both the Commissioner and the Minister, who both noted that the reason that we have this new legislation is that we want to make citizens more at the centre of access to healthcare. So may I begin with you, Sylvia? Do you believe that this new legislation really has the capacity to put the consumer at the centre and to really be different?
Yes, thank you. Well, we have just heard now from the Commissioner and previous speakers that the current legislation that we have has been very good in putting safe and efficacious medicines on the market. But we are faced at the moment with many market failures, and the world has been developing very quickly in terms of technology and production technologies, but also business models in the last 20 years. And I think today, very often people go to a pharmacy and they cannot get the products they need very quickly, which leaves them with a lot of worries and negative health impacts. But we have also to deal with very high prices and the fact, as the Commissioner just said, that you cannot get reimbursed medicines in all parts of Europe. So I think we have here a triple challenge that we urgently need to address. And let me say here very clearly, for making improvements, the most important point is actually to have that legislation on the table so we can have it in a democratically agreed process being negotiated by the Council and the European Parliament. And it's very crucial that we have that as soon as possible, because the European Commission and Parliament will come to an end in their term of office at some point, and we need tangible results by then. So that's very important, I would say.
Thank you very much, Sylvia, for introducing another problem into the already complex situation. So time pressure as well. There are so many pressures on us in this sector, but if I may, Chris, we discussed that I'm allowed to use first names just in case anyone's alarmed. You're of course representing a smaller country with a smaller market. What do you see as the particular challenges for a country like yours in terms of bringing medicines to patients in an equitable and accessible manner?
Thank you very much. That's better. So thank you very much, and thank you for our colleague from Austria and Dustine for organizing this. And I think it's an extremely important topic that we're discussing. which isn't being discussed enough. And time is of the essence because it is coming down to the table in a couple of weeks' time. It should have been tomorrow. But tomorrow we have a council, so it's postponed by a couple of weeks, which gives us time to discuss it today. But yes, one of the pillars of our union, which adds value to citizens wherever they live, is the internal market. Yeah? So the internal market is up there as one of the concepts of the European Union, together with freedom of movement, shared values. That and the fact that citizens anywhere across Europe have a right to have equal rights, and that should not be compromised by the fact that some patients might be living in a small market. Yeah, if you want to use that word. And because people living in small markets have had the difficulty in accessing some medicines. Presumably, well, not presumably, because, specifically because a number of suppliers are hesitant to introduce or to actually keep medicines on small markets. And there are various reasons why this happens. I'll mention a few. First and foremost is registration fees. So registration fees in small markets, especially for low volume medicines, can be a significant factor. You wouldn't imagine that a registration fee would stop a supplier from actually putting a medicine on a particular market in a particular country, but they do, especially for the small volume drugs. And for small volume drugs in small markets, profit margin can sometimes not be enough to justify if you're talking about profits, and sometimes, well, almost always, suppliers talk about profits. They say they have shareholders, which is fair enough, and that keeps them from putting drugs on the market. One way which this pharmaceutical strategy and the legislation that's being reviewed at the moment can help that is by having the registration fees paid centrally. So if this is an internal market, if the whole of the European Union is one internal market, then putting your product onto the European internal market should be enough to guarantee access anywhere in the European market. Which is not to say that the registration fees will remain central. Then it makes sense that they are then distributed per capita to member states. But that this central registration of products, including central registration fees, rather than as happens today, member states or suppliers have to pay registration fees in each and every member state, will remove one of the hurdles for suppliers to place small volume drugs in small markets on the market. And if you're a patient who happens to have a rare disease in a small country, then it's no consolation for you to know that you live in a small country, because you need to have access to that medicine as well as anyone else within the European Union. Secondly, there is a language problem for some of us. Now, patient safety, of course, dictates, and it's extremely important that any drug that is placed on the market has patient information or has the drug information leaflets in a language that the patients can understand. But for those countries or those regions or those markets, if you like, that have languages which are not widely used, especially those countries that do not have manufacturers for all the drugs within the country, accessing drugs in a particular language can be challenging. Now, if I buy a washing machine from Germany and I want to look at it, I'll probably get a manual with about 20 different languages, and I can understand in English. It will probably not be, at least in English, which button I need to press for the spilled dry. But that's a couple of medicines. If I get a medicine from Germany, the pack is in German, and citizens in my country cannot understand that. The solution is, and the strategy talks about this, electronic labeling. So we say we need to be future-proof. At the very least, we need to be present-proof, because this is technology which is so widespread. And if we bring in electronic patient information, then that means anybody anywhere within the European Union can procure medicines in any other language, so German, French, and Spanish, and patients with an app on the mobile phone or anywhere else can read information in a safe manner. Thirdly and finally, because I know I have only 4 minutes, but I stole a minute from you, is something that we learned during the pandemic, which is joint procurement. Joint procurement, it's something which we've been talking about for years. The industry have not always been in favor of it for various reasons, but because we were in a crisis and we needed vaccines quickly and we needed vaccines equitably, then we managed to negotiate and to procure for the first time ever across 27 member states. And this joint procurement saved hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives. I feel we do not need to wait for the next pandemic to expand this successful joint procurement, and that this should be something that we do routinely, especially when it comes to the innovative high-priced medicines and orphan drugs, cancer treatments. I think there is a space for joint procurement. It might not have to be across all 27 member states in one go. You mentioned the Benelux initiative. There's also the Valletta initiative for Mediterranean states, and I think this is something that the strategy needs to look at. So joint procurement, I think, is something which we need to develop over the months and the years to come.
Thank you so much. You've given us food for thought. You've also actually made my job very easy, because you've actually set up the question that I wanted to ask Emma next, which is really, what can we do to with this new piece of legislation to become more, I hesitate to use the term, but more future-proof? We can never be fully future-proof, but what can we do with this new legislation to address the challenges that we've experienced, particularly recently in terms of COVID?
Well, thank you very much. And thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I very much enjoyed the introduction by the Minister, by the Commissioner, by Minister Chris. I think, well, let me put my cards on the table. I actually think we've done a really good job so far. I think that we have delivered very well for the European patients, for the European consumers, and I think what has happened over the last 3 years has really shown some of the successes that the legislation can do, the regulatory system can do, and the overall ecosystem can enable. And I think this has been a remarkable achievement between governments, regulators, and I think the Commission's vaccine strategy was a game changer, and the joint procurement that came there really made a huge difference to availability of vaccines across Europe. So I think we've done a lot. I always think we can do more. I think we can build on some of the lessons that we have learned over the past 3 years in terms of future-proofing. Now, from the purely regulatory perspective, that's about using some of the lessons that we've learned to be more agile, to anticipate some of the challenges, to work even more closely with stakeholders, with patients, with health technology assessment bodies, because a lot of the barriers to access are about the interfaces between regulation, health technology assessment, the research and development pipeline. So we need to make this all streamlined. And I think this is something that we have learned how to do better over the last couple of years. So I think there are opportunities around simplification of our systems, and that is something that the Commissioner has taken up and that we see is something very important to take forward. I think there's opportunities around increasing the breadth and range of expertise to contribute to the regulatory process, and that's something that we're already working with our regulatory stakeholders to develop further, building on some of the gaps that we saw during the pandemic. And there are huge opportunities for us to work closer together in the whole shortages area. At the moment, if I just take you back to the beginning of the pandemic, right back 3 years ago today or yesterday, EMA had no mandate in shortages. This was a national responsibility. Now, but there was a real need, and we were seeing that China was shutting down. There were export bans. There were huge increases in intensive care. No vaccines, no therapeutics. So this was an area where Europe needed to work together. And actually, Europe worked together on an informal basis. We had regular exchanges about where the products were, who needed it next. Could we talk with the Chinese, the Indians to see where the barriers were? We worked a lot with the industry associations as well, distributors, patients. We now have a mandate for managing and mitigating shortages in public health emergencies, and the new legislation, as the Commissioner said, will strengthen some of these, some of the provisions in non-crisis situations. But I think the key to working with shortages is to make sure that we have transparency, an understanding of where the challenges are, and a willingness to work together to make this happen. So that's an area I think that we can also build on.
Thank you very much. And it's so encouraging to hear you talk about the successes that we have had and the significant successes that this new legislation will enable us to build on. We've already heard from both within the presentation of the Commissioner and the Minister. We've heard about the potential for new incentives, for new ways of encouraging research and development in innovative medicines. So Carla, I'd like to come to you, ask you, how do you think we can better go about really decoupling the issues around the commercialization of medicines and really incentivizing research in the direction of public needs?
Thank you for the question. Also, thank you for the invitation. I saw that we are really neighbors in this street, so it's good to see that we're so close. And I hope we stay close also in this whole area in this period of new legislation. I also want to make some promotion for our study we made. And we commissioned it, and it's about the financial ecosystem for pharmaceutical R&D. I hope a lot of you already. I see some nodding in this area, so I like that. I see it, and we published it last June, and we had a very interesting meeting with my colleagues here in Brussels last December, and I hope we have some next meetings about the follow-up of this this study. And yeah, okay, it's not completely game-changing and new, but I think that it's good that we have made this study, and that it underlines, and that's not that good news, but it underlines that the principle of financial gain goes over societal needs. So you see that it's still more important. And I think we need to send out a clear joint message as all member states, which medicines have the greatest needs. And already also, I think that the Commissioner has said something like that. And I think also that we as member states, we have to think about what we are willing to pay for these medicines we really need. And we should also think about the other thing, what we can do is the public research. We've seen in this report that still quite some part of it is public funding. I think something about 25%. So if we take up with all the member states together and to look what kind of research we want to do and what we want to pay for it, that would be very important.
Thank you very much. So let's come to the last of the first round of questions, and then we'll come to you in the audience. But Adrian, I'd like you to reflect a little bit about one of the other issues that has been discussed a lot, which is the issues around security of supply, and particularly security of supply in the medicines that you work with, so the generic medicines. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be here also at the Austrian permanent representation, because that's an area where our industry is actually investing for security of supply with several big investments there. I'm very proud of that contribution to Austria, but also to Europe's security of supply. Obviously, when we're looking at the future pharmaceutical legislation, this is a delicate balancing act, as the Commissioner pointed out, between, on the one hand, ensuring equitable access to medicines and availability in all countries, and on the other hand, how do you make sure that the industry can supply, is competitive enough to supply those medicines. We at Medicines for Europe, we're really quite supportive actually of this legislation going forward, because there are a lot of good things that we see in there. First of all, when it comes to access to medicines, I think everybody is aware that generic and biosimilar medicines, they contribute tremendously to increasing availability and access for European countries and for European patients, most of all. And there's really a good focus in the legislation on addressing some of the evergreening or delay tactics to delay generic and biosimilar medicines from coming to the market, with detrimental impacts on access to medicines. So we're excited about that. We also heard, and we know that, as Chris has mentioned, there are also some more radical measures being introduced there on how to ensure availability in each and every member state. We're actually open to some of those solutions, because in practice, we already have people like Chris knocking on our door saying, Adrian, we need to find solutions for my country, not just Chris, but other countries as well. So we need to find a way to make this work. I just hope that in the context of the legislation, we also have a problem-solving tool. Because in the end, if I look at the differences between some countries in Central and Eastern Europe versus some of the smaller markets like Cyprus or Malta, these are different challenges. So we need to have a link between the legislation and some kind of problem-solving committee with the member states. I'm not sure exactly how it could work, because that's actually what we have to do in practice, as we're trying to do right now with Malta, actually. I'm also excited in terms of affordable innovation that the Commission has looked at the issue of reformulation and repurposing for certain rare conditions and other conditions. There's a really strong effort there by the Commission, which is something completely new, very exciting, and should bring a lot of affordable options for innovation to many patients, including many charity groups who are really desperate for this to go forward. And we're excited to be partners in that process. When it comes to security of supply and shortages, obviously we've been through quite a rough ride during COVID and immediately post-COVID in the infectious disease space. I think here what we see is one of the big challenges is that the shortages we've seen during COVID and post-COVID, the big ones that have been European-wide, have been demand-driven shortages. These are demand surges. And how do you work to prevent, to predict, to plan for these kind of demand surges? And I think this is a space where I think we need to think a little bit further. We need to look at data, how we work together to use data for predictive models, how we plan with Emer Cook's agency, EMA, but also ECDC for the infectious season. I know EMA's onto that. I hope ECDC will get involved as well. These are all things we need to do together, which are very practical, but which are also not really clear in the legislation as of yet. And finally, we talked about manufacturing. So our industry is investing in Austria, in many other countries in the European Union for security of supply. We hope that some of the reforms of procurement, which the Commission's own study has shown are needed for security of supply, will also be introduced in parallel to this to make this manufacturing investment sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much to the panel for sticking to time. We start a little bit late, but we are on time with the late start. I'd like to open the floor to questions. And actually, Adrian, you kind of opened the floor a little bit to questions, because you mentioned one of the agencies that we can't have on the panel because we couldn't have everybody here. You mentioned ECDC, who are obviously really important in addressing particularly the future planning scenarios. But we'd also be very interested to hear from any of the other interest groups and stakeholders who feel that their voice should also be heard here. So I'm wondering if there is a question, somebody would like to raise their hand. Please, I believe you're from the patient organisation. No.
He's definitely
I
not.
May I give the floor first to somebody from the patient organisation, and then I will take another question. I will take your question next.
Behind the call. I'm John Mosley from a group called Eurolyme, and I have 4 little European groups for Lyme disease. And the question in Lyme disease is, we are using a lot of antibiotics. Everybody knows it, but it's ignored. Our doctors get in trouble because they use too many antibiotics, so it is really a subject. Our question is, can this legislation say for the antibiotics used by Lyme patients to do research to plant extracts that we don't know yet, who will be easier for patients to support? And so basically the question is, if you use plant extracts, you don't have patents. So you need a business model that the pharma companies can develop the new non-antibiotics, I hope, to make it easier for us and the pharma industry, that they don't need to make money on the sales.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take another question, but I will invite the panel to talk to answer that question. Perhaps not looking solely at Lyme's disease, but also looking at access to antimicrobials. Please, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you. So I'm Dominik Sturz. I'm the Vice President of the Austrian Rare Disease Alliances and also working with the European Rare Disease Alliance on some aspects of the rare disease community in Europe. And I'm also chairing the EPAG, the European Patient Advocacy Group at the European Reference Network Center for Rare Eye Diseases. And we are aware that ERNs in some aspects also contribute to building a more research-friendly ecosystem for rare disease patients in Europe by registries, etc., data generation. But I'm focusing on another aspect of this pharmaceutical legislation, which is of special interest to us, which is the OMP regulation proposal. In the eye space, where also my family belongs to, we have seen a lot of orphan drug designations, but we have also seen a lot of orphan drugs disappear from pipelines for various reasons. Some of those reasons could have been scientific redirection. In other cases, because the endpoints haven't been met for various reasons, again, not because the experimental treatment wasn't effective, but just because the endpoints were not good enough, because we are learning, we are in a learning system. So the question that I would like to—
One question.
Yeah, one question is, what is the ultimate purpose of that OMP regulation? When we talk about patient centricity and patient unmet medical needs, how can we introduce those mechanisms of patient partnership from the very beginning to make sure that we address those needs and that we have them in the center of research and development, and bringing the treatments to the bedside of patients? And how can we introduce a paradigm shift from seeing patients just seeing as an end consumer of a product? Because we are not talking about washing machines, but we are talking about life-changing medicinal products. So how can we introduce the paradigm shift?
Thank you very much. And I thank both of the questioners for raising those issues about the role of patients within the changing regulatory framework around pharmaceuticals, whether it's in the OMP rare disease area or whether it's in antimicrobial resistance and new approaches to conditions that need antimicrobials. I'm wondering, Imo, I would have thought you'd like to start.
Yeah, no, thank you very much.
Do you have a microphone?
Oh, yes, I need a microphone.
Because we do have people online and they won't hear at all otherwise. And just while we're setting that up, I do have an iPad and I can take questions from online as well, if you would like to do that. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you for the questions on Lyme disease. And in fact, it was really about, are there alternative models that we should be exploring? And I think that's something that's very important. And it's there are great opportunities there. I'll come back to that. let me just talk about the patients now, because and especially in the orphan area, and just remember that the Orphan Committee was the first committee ever to have patient representatives as members, not as observers, as members. And I think the patient community has played a huge role in advancing the patient centricity of the development of orphan medicinal products, and I really hope that they continue to do so. It is challenging. It is especially when you're dealing with a small number of patients. Trying to get the endpoints right is challenging both for regulators and for developers. But I think it's very important that patients are involved in this, because patients can tell us what matters. And that's something that really makes a difference. So not only through the representation on the Orphan Drug Committee, but also through the representation on the Patients and Consumers Working Party. We've had a lot of really fantastic input from patients, and we want to build on this. And in fact, one of our hopes is that we will also have patient representatives on the Committee for Human Medicinal Products, and that's not the case at the moment. So definitely involvement of patients to help to further the patient centricity of what we do is something that we see as very important as part of strengthening our regulatory system. And then maybe just a few words on looking at alternative models, because we talk about antimicrobial resistance, and we talk about the search for new antibiotics, but actually we're also looking at alternatives to antibiotics. And these are something that there are a number of different projects being supported by the European Commission RTD under the Horizon project that look at alternatives to antibiotics. So certainly it doesn't have to be. I think what we would like to see is not just more antibiotic, but also more effective treatments that may not be antibiotics, but prevent the need for antibiotics. And I think that would be very beneficial in the area of Lyme disease. What I will say is it's not that easy. If it was that easy, I think we'd have a lot more on our doorstep at the moment. What I can also say is that we are committed to doing as much as we can from a regulatory perspective to ensure that new regulatory or that alternatives to antibiotics can be assisted through the regulatory process in areas where there's promise for unmet medical need.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask Adrian, you'd like to come back, and then I'll take one more question from the floor.
Very quickly, I think in one of the remarks of the Commissioner on antibiotics, I think there was a positive development there in the sense that she has mentioned the need for looking at different market models for antibiotics, new procurement approaches to secure the access to all types of antibiotics in markets. I think this is definitely the right approach to take for availability. I think when it comes to AMR or concerns about AMR for people consuming antibiotics, there'll also be some measures in there. But I think maybe we can go further there, and we can think about thinking about the e-leaflets and digitalization. We can do some very simple things around helping to educate patients about the use of their antibiotics so that when they're prescribed, because they need it for their illness, they take everything correctly, and we can dramatically actually reduce AMR with this kind of tool. So I think that's positive. And also for alternative data for drug approvals, there is something possibly in the draft legislation that will be out there. It's limited for new chemical entities or new biological entities, but I think if it's expanded to other developments as well, it could be quite positive for patient access. Some of these new data sources could be admissible for regulatory approvals.
Thank you, Carla.
I like to add also something, two subjects. First of all, the patients. I think as one of the member states, I can say it's very important that these patients are having contact with the people in Europe to tell them about their worries and what they see as possibilities, and that we keep us alert. I think that's very important, that we as member states are very, very alert in all the discussions we will have. And the other thing is, I want to mention about AMR, and the commissioner said something about vouchers, and I see already a nod on the other side. We are really not looking forward about this system. We see that we need a system, we see that we have to do something about it, but please look at other possibilities than vouchers and be more transparent.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take another question from the floor in just one moment. I just want to acknowledge that there have been a number of questions that have come in from the online audience, and our online audience was nearly 700. So there are a lot of people listening. So those of you who are in the room, you're fortunate to be here. There were a number of questions around antimicrobial resistance, which I feel have already been answered to some extent. We can't answer everything. There are also a number of questions which were directed to the Commission as to the timeline. We haven't got those answers now. So please don't ask the panelists now when the legislation is going to be presented, because they don't know either. Or if they do, I'm not sure that they're able to tell us. Please, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you very much. Thank you to the Austrian Prime Rep and to Gastein for organizing this discussion. My name is Yanis Natsis. I'm the director of the European Social Insurance Platform, ESIP, which means the voice of the statutory social security institutions. Many call us the payers. But I want to remind that we are not just the payers, because we cover the whole spectrum of social protection, all branches of social security, so all sorts of benefits that we enjoy in Europe, including our pensions, including our sickness benefits, family benefits, etc. And why am I saying this? Because it is important to zoom out a bit. It seems that as if we're having a technical discussion about one sector only. Actually, we're not. We're effectively talking about sustainability of systems and about social protection in Europe and social cohesion and solidarity. And I love that this word has already come up, because at the end of the day, and this is for us very, very important, that in this reform, which we very much welcome, but affordability needs to be a #1 priority. The question of data, the question of having robust evidence so that we know, Imer, and will come also to you, what kind of medicines we are approving, whether we know what we're prescribing, whether we know what we are reimbursing effectively. So these are for us very, very important questions. And of course, the question of competition. I hear a lot, and I heard a lot also today about the competitiveness of the sector. Of course, this is a no-brainer. But at the same time, for us, as the payers or the buyers, I know that Chris Fern has been talking about strengthening the buyers over the past years through the Valletta and other very, very important initiatives, to strengthen the side of the buyers and to make sure also that we have a healthy and robust competition and within the sector. And I'll stop here. So essentially the questions, how do we prioritize these elements, and how do we strengthen the collaboration also between the EMA and the other links of the chain, HTA, regulators, payers, etc., to make sure that we have better and affordable medicines with guaranteeing essentially patients' access to evidence-based healthcare. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to be quite tight on time this time, because we do have to be out of here at a certain point before midnight. May I ask, Iwa, would you like to jump in first? I feel you're going to be in the hot spot a lot.
Yeah, no, I think Yanis put his finger on it. It's about evidence. It's about the best evidence generation, and it's about evidence generation that means something to all stakeholders across the ecosystem. And part of the work that we're doing in this area, let me just point to a couple of things that we're doing. So we're working under the HTA regulation, where we have this, the parallel scientific advice and the joint assessment that actually builds on a lot of work that we did together over the last actually 10 years. But now there's a legal framework for this to happen. But I think what we've learned from the 10 years is that there's a need for much better mutual understanding as to what evidence is needed for patients. And that's something that we need to build on, and we're committed to doing that. This also comes up in, so one of the initiatives that we're working on is accelerating clinical trials in the EU. And this is about making sure that we use the benefits of the clinical trial regulation, of the momentum around better evidence, to really make sure that this translates into good science that supports good decision making for patients. I'm not going to say for regulators, because this actually, every product is for a patient, it's not for a regulator. But we need to understand, we need to make sure that we do have good evidence generation that will satisfy the needs of regulators, of payers, and of HTAs, and of patients, of course. I also want to just briefly mention the work we're doing on real world evidence, because I think that links as well, because we won't always be able to do the best randomized clinical trial that will be able to support the evidence generation that would be needed in an ideal world. But we can supplement what we do by using real world evidence, and we have set up the Darwin Data Analytics Real World Interrogation Network, which allows us to do federated studies across Europe, to federate the data that we get from different healthcare providers, to bring it all together to give us better evidence. And part of this is about also making sure that we have standardized data quality that allows us to bring the evidence together as well. And this can complement the data that we have on rare diseases. It can contribute to the evidence that we get from randomized control trials. And we're already seeing, I think we've done already 15 studies, and we've 50 planned for this year. So we're seeing what we can do with this, and this will go from strength to strength, and it really would put data at the center of the regulatory system.
Thank you. Chris, do please jump in.
Okay. So just go over some of the, I think the question on Lyme disease was extremely relevant, and it's something that all of us need to look at. So alternatives to what's already established. But just to come to these two questions for the patients group and the insurers. I think that the heart of this comes really to the heart of what we're discussing. And the question is so big and fundamental that it's almost philosophical, which is the system that we've been using for developing new medicines over the last 100 years or so the correct system or not? In other words, is the system whereby new medicines come onto the market and are developed and come onto the market by the pharmaceutical industries driven by profit, or should we look at something else? Because let's be honest, put it very crudely, this is how the system works. A new molecule becomes medicine available to patients only if the industry or the company developing it feel that there is a profit. Is this the way that we should be procuring or developing our medicines, or should we be looking at patient interests, at evidence? My reading of and again, this is, we'll see in a couple of weeks' time because we don't really know, but my reading of the pharmaceutical strategy is that we are not changing drastically the system as we've known it for the last 100 years, but we are patching it up. So unmet needs is exactly this. If you look at antimicrobials, there is a big need for new antimicrobials. There are only 3 or 4 possible antibiotics, enough of antibiotics coming into the pipeline over the next few years. So the strategy talks about incentives. I might put a question into your mouth for you to ask me, but this is something which we need to talk about, and the development of incentives for antimicrobials.
We anticipated the questions on the screen.
So we'll talk about this in a minute. But this is exactly it. Evidence again. Should we start paying for medicines before we know that they actually work? Because we do. At the moment we do, which is what you call real life data. Should we be paying for medicines without actually knowing that they work? Because there's the pressure for doctors to use them. So yes, this is at the basis of what we are discussing. The European reference networks work. I think they're extremely important tools, and we have Europe-wide registries for rare diseases that will work even better. And the European health data space, I suspect, will also help, because that will allow data to flow more easily from one area to the other. So yes, to my reading is the strategy is going to make things slightly better, but it's not going to revolutionize the whole pharmaceutical industry as we know. Revolutions usually leave a lot of dead people. So in a way, evolution is better than revolution.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to take a question from the online audience, and I'm going to address it to you, Sylvia. I'm going to ask you particularly to give your reflections on what we can do to build better resilience. We saw the challenges of resilience during the COVID pandemic. And just to give reassurance to people in the room here, I will then come to the two people in the middle of the room to ask questions, but I'm going to ask everybody to keep things short. Sylvia.
Yes, thank you. Well, we hope that the Commission will go very serious in the legislative proposal, actually to do more on prevention of shortages. That is something which is super important for us. We think the industry should do prevention plans, and this should be obligatory so that the member states can also give comments on that. We think there need to be advanced systems in member states for monitoring of stocks. There must be stockpiling in the EU, and we need to make sure that there are cautions in case there is higher demand or we have an interruption of the supply chains. But we also need to put in place really dissuasive sanctions, actually. If companies are not playing to the rules, if they don't convey the information, if people are going to the pharmacy again and again and they cannot get what they need, this cannot last any longer. So that's for us a super important element of the legislation. I would maybe make just one remark, if I may, to Chris, on the electronic product information. If you want to know how you can have very fast access to medicine, I think still taking a leaflet out of the box is much faster than scanning something with your mobile phone. So digital information can be a complementary, but I think I would fundamentally disagree that member states should in the future have a choice in their country to decide if something is only digitally available or in a written format. And I also deal with washing machines for Bill because I'm working on product safety, and the legislators have just decided that for consumers, it's obligatory in any case to make written information still available with the product. And that is something which I just would like to say, even if you're living in a small country, you should be able to read the leaflet.
Thank you very much. I promised to go back to the floor. So I have a question there, and then I have a question here, and I have more questions than I can take. But if we take in the middle row, then you're being very gallant sharing, but I will ask you both to make your question.
Yes, hello, this is Claudia Schadl from the Austrian Social Insurance here in Brussels. I keep it short because it's very complementary to what Janis said, and I think also Anja will then be complementary to me. I think the most important part for us is really evidence generation, because Carla, you said something about what are we really willing to pay for drugs we really need. I would like to add something on that. Based on a therapeutic advantage, based on hard clinical evidence. So I think what I'm missing a bit, and I think this has to be done still until 29 March, I hope so. How can we really improve a close involvement of payers and HTA bodies? Because I also have to underline that the Austrian Social Insurance is also an HTA body for the outpatient sector. And another question is, it's more an open question. How can we have a real open discussion when it comes to reshoring? Why are companies moving away? Why are they? I don't think that more incentives will help more. So I think we need to have a broad, open, honest discussion. What do we really need to keep companies in Europe? Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, it's very much in line. Anja Schiel, Norwegian Medicines Agency. And today I represent the HTA side of my agency, just to ensure IMA. Yes, pretty much the same. I think I read you had version A, B, and C, considerations, incentives, and obligations only where no other option. As an HTA, I see tons of no options, and I have a very strong need for more regulation, because it's called a regulation. It's not a free pick your best choice menu. And I see very little obligation required from the industry. And it means also that we have to stop this inflation of making everything super special. We have no definition of unmet medical need. It's in the eye of the beholder. If we discuss it, we will define it very differently. Now we have high unmet medical need. We make even more incentives for orphan, which we do not see as an invitation for innovation. Because if I was a developer of an orphan disease, and I would see that the first to the market gets, at best case, 13 years of exclusivity, then all I can say is we need more competition and less incentives in areas where competition would really make the difference.
Thank you very much. So we've got two very challenging questions there. I'm going to ask the panel to try and reply to those relatively quickly. We're going to sacrifice prepared questions, I think, because you're asking many of the issues that we had prepared. So we're in your hands. But who would like to go first on the two questions that we've had around sanctions, sustainability, real competition, involvement of HTA? Who's going to take all of those first? Adrian, you'd like to start?
Microphone has.
Carla, you're coming in next.
So maybe I'll try and respond a little bit on competition and also on the point on investing in manufacturing in Europe. So on the competition point, I do agree that there should be stronger measures, and I believe there will be some proposals. Again, we don't know, as Chris says, but there will be some proposals to strengthen the competition at expiry of exclusivities or patents or whatever is protecting there, so that there is less of this overrun of overextending these measures. And I think this is sorely needed because there are very clear case studies where not only has this harmed the profits of the generic industry, but this has harmed the access to medicines for some very serious conditions for patients. And so this is absolutely necessary and is definitely a positive move forward. I think when it comes to manufacturing in Europe, so I think there are kind of two different things. There's the innovative industry and there's the generic industry. Let's say around 70% of medicines, of the prescription medicines at least that people are taking, they are generic medicines, and that is where the manufacturing in Europe issue comes up. So, I mean, we need to be realistic. We've had, since the financial crisis, a policy of cost containment, primarily on the generic side. Look at the prices of generics, they've gone down by 66% over that period. Different on the innovative side, I guess we've been cross-subsidizing to a certain extent, but that model just doesn't work if you want us to invest in sustainable manufacturing. So we need to find different approaches here. The Commission has done an excellent study on procurement, which shows what can be done. There's been a lot of talk of support for investment from the EU. In practice, that hasn't really happened yet, but maybe there's still some time for this. But I think this is definitely an opportunity. But you know, we should sit down and figure out the ways to do this, because there's a lot more we can do. Whereas I don't think we should manufacture everything in Europe, but increasing our security of supply and resilience and diversification, we definitely can do, and I think we should do.
Thank you very much, Carla.
Yeah, I think a lot of good things already were said in the audience, but I also want to say that I want to respond also on the legislation which possibly is coming, but we also have legislation already here. For example, if you think about REACH, you know, that's legislation which is very difficult for a lot of companies if you want to have your business in Europe, because you are not competitive with other countries if you have this really strict, and I think it's good to have strict legislation about environment, but it's so hard to be competitive for companies in Europe with other companies. So that's one thing we have to look at. And on the other hand, I completely agree with you about we have to, it's not all so extreme what's going on. So perhaps we have to be a little bit more extreme in our legislation and to be more tough. You know, if you look at, for example, the period of the time you have this patent, that's quite a long period. And I also saw in the Netherlands that the prices are not always going down after this period. And then I really cannot understand what's happening. You get, if you have a patent period and you want to earn something, because of course you are a company who wants to earn something and you have this period, you can do it. But after that, I really cannot understand, also from moral side of view, that you're not lowering your prices after that. So I think we have a lot to do and a lot of things we have to discuss with each other, and we cannot really, I will repeat it a lot of times, I think, but we cannot do it alone as one member state. We have to join forces to do something about it.
Thank you very much. Ima, did you want to come back on these issues?
Well, I think the main issues for me were around the scientific evidence and how we work closer with payers and HTA bodies. And I think I already addressed it in my response to Janis. I mean, what I will say again is this is something that is one of our priorities, because we see it as being, well, if we authorize a medicine, it's because we want it to go to patients. So we have to make sure that what happens is it gets to patients. So do we understand why? And do the other players in the ecosystem understand our decision making as well? And I think this is a two-way street. This isn't a one-way street. This is about getting together and really making sure that we are doing what we can collectively for the benefit of the patients.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to give you a bit of a housekeeping heads up, because I got permission, just in case there was a lot of interest, to extend until 7:45. So I am going to work towards that deadline, just so in case you're wondering where this is going. I have one question here and then one question there, and then I will see how time is going. Please, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you very much. Nick Roelmans, Professor of Healthcare and Public Health from the Netherlands. And I was asked to say something from a European Patient Forum perspective, although I'm not formally a representative. So if you look at the legislation and pharmaceuticals, and you look at the sort of patient interest in having affordable, person-centered pharmaceuticals for better outcomes, it does also take a lot of other aspects. The better outcomes are not only depending on sequencing and a tailored molecule, for example, but also the whole personalized process centricity in providing healthcare services. So it does also has implication on how we redesign and transform our healthcare systems. Also some other aspects like data collection, real-world evidence, etc. was mentioned. So this has implications for infrastructure, at the European level, but also at the country level. So this points to, okay, how is this ready for Central Eastern European countries or other countries who might not yet be equipped to that? The point of outcomes and payments. So we probably have to reform payment systems, outcome-based payments. And also for this, we need these more integrated approaches. So the key question would be, also alluding a little bit to what the Commissioner was saying, how do we see this in alignment with other aspects of legislation and regulation? Do you think it's currently sufficiently related to other legislations and also ready for implementation, or should we do something extra?
So thank you very much. I'm going to ask the panel to come back on that. See, Chris, you're already raising your hand. And then I have one question from the floor more, and then we're going to see how we're doing on time. Certainly. Would you like to ask your question, Ed, in blue? Do you have? Thank you.
Dominika Misztela, Plasma Protein Therapeutics Association. I have a question for Dr. Imar Cook. You mentioned regulatory flexibility during COVID pandemic. With that in mind, do you expect that EMA will extend the COVID flexibilities that were afforded for manufacturers and marketing authorization holders after the pandemic? Because that has been crucial for us to import a good 40% of our active pharmaceutical ingredient, which is plasma, from the US. If we did not have the ability to have remote inspections during COVID, the plasma would not arrive in Europe. So that's my question. My first questions, I think that is quite important to clarify. And obviously the flexibilities, they take a lot of resources. We saw amazing speed during the COVID-19 pandemic, rolling reviews of vaccines, and this is something that obviously costs resources. So how is EMA preparing for that if these flexibilities were to go on? My second is actually a remark.
Very quick, please.
Shortages and stockpiling. Stockpiling is not necessarily an appropriate way for all medicines. If there's not enough of the medicine to go around, a stockpile for a large country, for instance, for plasma-derived medicinal products, is actually the consumption of 3 to 4 smaller countries such as Netherlands, Belgium, and then. So I think we really need to have a discussion on that. EMA's workshop on shortages last week was certainly quite informative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to be able to take any more questions at this point, but I would like the panel to jump in on those. Chris, I think you wanted to jump in.
Actually, I don't want to miss the opportunity to speak a bit about AMR. I think the Commissioner mentioned it, and it's a topic which we don't talk enough about. And so, if I may, I'll take a couple of minutes just to talk about AMR, if you don't mind. If you look at the figures, there are conservatively 1.5 million people die directly from AMR globally a year, and another 4.5 from AMR-related diseases. So that's 6 million people a year from AMR, which means 10 people a minute are dying because of AMR-related causes. So 1 person every 6 seconds dies from AMR-related causes. So we're talking about something which is extremely, extremely important, and it will be a big pity if the suggestions that are coming out from the Commission are not taken up by member states, not because member states need to agree, but if we don't come to a conclusion on what we need to do about AMR, I think we'll lose a big opportunity. Of course, AMR is not only about producing new antibiotics. It's a whole one health. So there's animal health, there's plant health, there's the environment, and of course there's human health as well. And there are national action plans across all countries all over the world, because the different scenarios in different countries require different action plans. But what is happening is that the antibiotics that we have are becoming microbes are becoming resistant to them, and we think we'll get new antibiotics in, so it doesn't matter. But new antibiotics are not coming in. Yeah? So that's the whole question, the pipeline. And the suggestion from the Commission, Commissioner explained today, is twofold. One is the guaranteed revenue, which means it's what Sweden are doing to a certain extent, and the UK or England is doing to a certain extent, which is a subscription type of model. You pay not necessarily up to how much you use.
I'm going to have to hurry you up a little bit.
Yeah, but I think this is extremely important, because the other issue is the vouchers. Yeah, so there's this question of vouchers, because this seems to be the main trust that this pharmaceutical strategy is taking to tackle AMR, the production of vouchers. And member states, myself, I'm also included, are in the most part against this. And so unless we come up with something which is going to work, then we're going to end up with nothing to address AMR in this round of negotiations, which I think will be an extremely big pity. So unless the Commission, within the next couple of weeks, have intensive talks with member states so that we can come up with a different initiative or a different idea to make sure we have enough antibiotics to combat this really important question, we're going to run into trouble. And we, at the moment, this is where we are with the strategy, to my reading. The Commission is saying one thing, member states are saying something else, and there's nothing in between. So this is urgent.
We can find together a better solution, I'm sure of it.
It is indeed urgent. Unfortunately, I have been told I do have to keep to time, and I've already extended it to the limit that I believe I can extend it to. So I'm going to put Minister Rauch in a more difficult position than perhaps you would like to be in by just saying, could you summarize everything? No, but could you perhaps, of course, could you perhaps just give us some of your key takeaways of where you think the big challenges for this new piece of legislation are? If you could share your feelings with us, either, yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Of course, I try my very best because now I'm the man between you and having a drink outside. It's a
You're not the only man, there's another man.
Oh yes. Keep it short and simple. I try. One of the most important takeaways for me is of this discussion today evening is we have to discuss this issue more often and publicly. It's a need to discuss it. And another is without transparency, there's no trust in the institutions, and we need trust. Trust is a need. And third, I want to say, don't forget us things which have worked well the last 2 or 3 years, just like joint procurement and also the 2 tipping points in the history of the European Union. The first tipping point was the COVID-19 pandemic, and the second was the war in Ukraine. And both points showed us without European solidarity, we lose everything. And let's keep us in this kind of solidarity. Otherwise, we lose our democratic systems, I guess. And the other topics in the discussions, let me say, as a health minister, it's not acceptable that patients do not benefit from innovation simply because medicines are either unaffordable or unavailable. Or moreover, this availability and access should apply to all EU markets. Remember, one of the key lessons we learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, that is, no one is safe until everyone is safe. So also a point of solidarity. And a key principle of a well-functioning European Health Union is that it must ensure that access to healthcare, including innovative medicines, should not depend who you are or where you live. So, but the positive thing I can say, I'm an optimist based on the real situation in the European Union. But the last 2-3 years shows us we can do a lot if we stay unified, if we keep solidarity. So I'm very optimistic that we are able to do it in a good way, for a good future, for the European Union, for our patients, for our solidarity. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So, just before handing over to Clemens to really give a closing element, I would just like to say thank you to our speakers, and particularly for the important issues that you raised. I'm not going to do a summary, even though I was asked to do one, because I'm sure Clemens would do a much better summary than I will. The one thing that I really take away from what we heard today is there is a huge amount of enthusiasm and hope for this new piece of legislation. There are also significant fears. There are also significant worries about how ambitious it is, how much time we have to deliver it in. And I think the thing that stands out for me most is that we've seen the 3 A's of affordability, accessibility, and availability. For me, there's very much a 4th A in the room, which is the aspirationalness of it all. Let's try and make sure that it's not just aspirational, but really an achievement. And with that, I hand over to you, Clemens. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra. Dear friends and ladies and gentlemen, for me as the president of the European Health Forum Gastein, I only have to say I'm very humbled today because, you know, how was it possible that we had this high-level panel here. You know, the commissioner, the deputy prime minister, a minister, my hero Emma Cook, because you know she was really very instrumental to driving us through the pandemic crisis with this expedited market authorization processes for our vaccines. You are really my hero in that. And the other esteemed panelist. It's but why is it? Because I think we hit the topic which is relevant, not only relevant for the Brussels bubble in health, but it is relevant for the people. And I would say it's relevant for the European citizens, because it's not about the Maltese or the Austrian or the Dutch citizen, it's about the European citizens, because this is what we also demonstrated, and some of you might remember that I also had a role to play with this joint purchasing thing with the vaccines. There we exercised that there is only one citizen in Europe, and that's a European citizen, and it's not the Maltese or the Austrian, the Bulgarian, or whatever citizen, because all the European citizens had the same access to the same quality, the same price of the products we were able to purchase for the European citizens. So that's a very important aspect. So I think we hit a topic which is of utmost relevance for the people, for the citizens, and but this is also common sense somehow, you know, because if you look at polls, open question polls, you know, and ask people in Europe what is the most important thing for them, it's health. It's very simple. Sometimes I think the politicians have to be reminded that it's not about many other things. It is simply about health. What we heard today is promising. I think the commissioner lined out some very good principles if they end up in this legislative initiative. I hope so. But the true measure, and I have to remind the two council members here, and you too as a council member, so to say, for your minister, and for the European parliamentarians, and for the European Commission, the measure will be if through this new legislation, European citizens have accessibility, affordability, availability of innovative drugs. That's what they're interested in. The payers are interested in for a fair price, but the payers use the money of the people. It's not the payers' money. It is the tax money or the contribution money of citizens. But that's what they need. And the other thing they need is a secure supply chain and availability of what you said, 75 or 70% of the drugs available in Europe. That's why Adrian is sitting here, because they are the main suppliers for medicines, the generic producers. And we do have a problem. I also can reveal in my former life as a DG in the Ministry of Health, we were very successful in bringing your prices down.
Too successful.
Yes, I'm very proud of it. We had in many member states of the European Union, we had very clever regulations bringing your prices for generics down. But I'm open here that also to say, since I'm retired, I can say it now, that the level we reached a level which is now dangerous. It's really dangerous, and we have to rethink our price policies when it comes to generics. I really think so. The same happens, by the way, with the vaccine producers. You know, we also brought down the prices of vaccines to a level where now the market is very unattractive. Minister Rauch said it, I think, and you said it all. We have to have the discussions again more publicly. We have to have them loud. We have to have controversies here. But we shouldn't forget, and I say that in Brussels here, you know, we shouldn't forget that outside of this bubble here, there are European citizens, and they need us to solve these problems. I would like to thank my team to put together this event, my team in the European Health Forum, but also the team here in the PermRep. Thank you for hosting us here, Ambassador. It's an honor to be here. And I can promise you we will continue the discussion in Gastein. So you're all wholeheartedly invited to come to Gastein to the European Health Forum 2023, which will take place on the 26th to the 29th of September. And you can be sure that we put that topic high on the agenda, because I think it is very, very important. I am standing now really between you and the glass of wine, which is healthy, by the way. And I wish you all a good evening. I think it's Austrian Wine Ambassador. I hope so. Yes. I wish you all a pleasant evening. And once again, thank you to our panelists, thank to the ministers, thank to the commissioner for being here and being so open and frank. It was very insightful and enlightening. So in this respect, good evening and enjoy the rest of the evening here. Thank you very much.